Excited to welcome back Margie Odom, speaker, licensed therapist, author, emotional eating coach, and consultant. And this is part two, which I'm thrilled about because I never even got around to what I really wanted to ask her in the first place. Welcome back, Margie.
Thank you. I'm glad to be back.
Oh, so we're going to dive right back in. We had kind of given a teaser about this in our last episode, but just this idea of healing through trauma work, healing through behavioral change, through spiritual healing. I'm going to hand the floor right over to you and let you run with that, your story, why we should all care about this.
Yeah. Okay. So my story started when I was really young. I grew up in a family that was very competitive. Really, I'm the youngest of four kids. Even dinner table time was competitive. I mean, if you didn't eat fast enough, that food was going to come off your plate, especially being the youngest. I think you get that sometimes. But, we were really achievement focused and there wasn't a lot of nurturing and love. One of the few times where we all came together was dinner. And that actually dissipated when I was pretty young, probably by the age of 7 or 8. My mom went back to work and my siblings that were much older than me started to move into other things. So we really didn't have a lot of connection. And I didn't realize that that was such a missing piece for me. But what I did learn to do is sort of find comfort through food. And I did that in some pretty sneaky ways sometimes, like at friends' houses, I'd find their junk drawer, or we had no junk food at my house. So the rare times maybe we'd go out for ice cream, I always kind of felt like I better get this in. I got to have as much as I can, because if I don't, I'm not going to get it again. Who knows, the next time we might have ice cream or something like that. And that really kind of fed into, once I grew a little older, got my driver's license, got to college, got some freedom, I started to really see food as like the fun freedom thing in my life. I also was a very social person, and we would meet at fast food restaurants and, kind of always it was food centric. And I didn't really realize how food centric it was. And I didn't really have a weight issue until I got to college and I gained some freshman 15 kind of thing. And all of that, then, I grew up in this household where you had to be thin, and my father was really into making comments about other people's size and what they look like. So when I noticed myself gaining weight, I remember I tried on one of my friend's formals and it was a size that should have fit me and it didn't. And I was like, oh my goodness, oh no. And I went into a real spiral with that. And that was the first time I went on a diet. And then, oh, wow, I can drop this weight pretty quickly. And that got very alluring for me. And I started to just continuously do that, up and down, up and down. And I never thought it was emotional. I always thought, oh, I'm just doing this because I want to stay thin and I don't have enough willpower to do it. So I have to continue on and keep pushing. And I'd get extremely hypercritical of myself. Every time I weighed myself, if the scale went up at all, and it did, it would go up inevitably, because no one can stay on a diet forever. I got married. I was at a super thin weight when I got married, and then had my son, which was amazing. But I gained a whole bunch of weight when I got pregnant with my son. And then that really got to the point where physically it just got more and more difficult for me to make all this exercise craze, a priority, and had my second child, just kept adding pounds, having less time, not knowing how to make myself a priority, just really spiraling. And also, because I was such a huge people pleaser, working for this really moody, hateful boss who made my life miserable, did not help. So between work and family life and the self-hatred I was experiencing, I was under just a tremendous amount of stress. So of course I decided to go back to school to add a little something else to my plate, and get licensed as a therapist, which, sure. I always laugh. I always say, therapists, whatever we say we treat, it's our issue. You could just know. If you treat anxiety, that therapist has anxiety too. So here I was like, I'm going to learn how to treat emotional eating. I did. I worked on that. But really, in the therapy world, especially during that window of time, there was nobody that really understood emotional eating. We were very focused on anorexia and bulimia at that time. And so I was kind of an island, and of course, still trying to work it out for myself, and also saying, I'm treating this thing. And I went on like that for a few years, and I was continuing to cycle and really felt like a failure. I just like, I can't figure this out for me. I'm helping other people to some degree, but probably not to the degree that I want to. And then my mother died. My parents had a car accident. My mother passed away, and that was an impetus to get me into therapy. I had done some therapy, but not really the trauma work. I'd done talk therapy. This therapist was a genius. I mean, she was like, you understand, like, you've had a very difficult childhood. You had a very difficult life. Like, she really made me come to grips with something I was not, sort of being honest with myself about. All these things that had sort of contributed to my food pattern and had made me really not love myself enough. And so that started me. Once I started working through some trauma, that really opened my eyes to, oh, okay, this is a trauma root that I have. It is really not about food or willpower at all. And even once I did that work, I still had work to do, but that led me down a path of where I like to call it the woo-woo stuff. I started to open my mind to energy work and what's called havening techniques, which is one of the things that I teach my clients. All these things that were outside the box for the therapy world. And as I learned them and opened myself up to all these different healing practitioners, people in the shaman world, and, all these different things, I realized, oh, I really, this is where it all comes from. It's all these different parts. It's not just, oh, you have a mental block around food, or, oh, you have a trauma root, so we'll heal that and everything will be fine. It's, no, we have to come at it from all these angles. So once I kind of came to grips with that, I started to write my book. And that's where I thought the journey would end. I'm going to write this book and then I'm just going to keep doing my therapy practice. But no, Spirit World had other plans for me. So I started to coach. People started asking for coaching from my book, and I started running groups, especially during COVID. I got really entrenched in running groups for people over Zoom, and that really actually got me through the pandemic. I thought it was wonderful and absolutely filled my bucket. To the point where I just was like, oh, okay, so people now want this and demand more than I'm doing it. So I created the self-guided program. People can go through the program self-guided without me guiding them through, or with me guiding them through. They kind of have all these options. But the journey that got me there was very emotional, mental, spiritual, physical. And that's why I say it's all four of those pillars that people really need to work through to heal from this disordered eating that they're stuck in.
I feel like I almost need to totally rewind us and help unpack some of this for our listeners today, because there's so many good nuggets in here. In the first one, when people hear the word trauma, I feel like they think it needs to be really intense. They're coming from like a rape background, or they're coming from abusive, or when you used to think of yourself before somebody said you've experienced trauma, would you have ever called or thought that you came from trauma?
Not even a little bit. I was like, no, I had this great family. I mean, look, there's 4 siblings and, we do this together and that together. I had no idea that it was trauma. And the best way I've heard that explained is big T trauma and little t trauma. And big T trauma is that rape history, that witnessing of a natural disaster, all these major house fires, all these things that can happen to you that are obviously catastrophic for almost everyone. But then the little t traumas are these chronic patterns, this neglect, this verbal stuff, this emotional piece that just kind of continues to chip away at your self-concept. And that is absolutely trauma. It's to the same degree, often worse than one catastrophic event.
Thank you. Yes, beautifully said. And if somebody were to think, maybe I should investigate, I mean, you're the perfect person to send them to. What's the talk around? How does somebody even know to get started? Do you know
Yeah.
that this might be something they should be investigating, little T trauma?
I always say to people when they reach out to me, what have you done to try to fix this problem before? And people will say, "Oh, I've been to therapy. I've talked to a therapist," and I'll say, "Well, did you talk about it or did you do trauma work? Because those are not the same thing." And if you've talked about what's happened to you, that's great. I don't want to diminish how important it is to share that and release shame around that, but that's not going to get trauma out of your body. So if you experience things like when people raise their voice, I clam up and I don't know how to communicate, or I don't know how to say no to people, or when I get upset, I immediately start yelling and I don't know how to stop. Those are trauma responses. We have people hear fight or flight all the time. We also have freeze or fawn, which is people pleasing. And if you catch yourself having those responses in life, then there's probably some stored trauma in the body that has yet to be released, whether you've talked about it or not. And you really want to find a therapist that is trained in trauma, not just talk therapy. And again, I'm not dissing talk therapy. It's super wonderful and important. But trauma training is something different that's above and beyond what we get in school. And not everybody opts to do that. So you can even work with your talk therapist and go do your trauma work with somebody else, which is often the case. It's important to look at how you respond to things in life and where do you have patterns, negative patterns that keep showing up that despite your best intentions won't go away. That's a great indicator that there's probably some trauma that you need to work through.
Okay. And I am hoping that society nowadays is a little bit more open-minded to walking through the doors of therapy. And then you're taking it to this next level, though. I love that you called it woo-woo. To a lot of individuals, it is woo-woo, but there's this next level of healing that can go on if we can get open-minded to it.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And do you find that once people are in the door and they're experiencing other success, that all of a sudden that more openness just naturally happens? Like they don't have to believe in it yet. They just have to keep taking the next right step. And then how does that look within when you're talking to somebody, especially someone who's going, I barely was willing to come to a therapist, let alone these other things that you're talking about?
100%. I try to meet people where they are. And I do share it from the jump. I say I'm a woo-woo person. And I do tell people, a lot of times one of the fears that comes up is, well, that may go against my, spiritual beliefs in some way. And I always say, I highly doubt that because I have really strong spiritual beliefs and is definitely not against the spiritual beliefs. So that's the first thing I like to tell people. The other piece is stepping outside your comfort zone is where change happens. Change does not happen by staying in your comfort zone. And rarely do we see great things when we stay in our comfort zone. So your comfort zone got you where you are now. If you won't step outside of it, you're not going to have what you want. And really, when I talk about woo-woo things, I say, look, I don't train in anything that did not help me heal. So as I've gone through my own healing journey, if something helped me heal, then I go get trained in it and incorporate it into my practice. And that's what I want for people. I want you to become autonomous of me and be able to use this tool for your own healing forever. And maybe even teach it to other people too, because that's what the woo-woo stuff is. Not everybody can be a therapist, right? But we all can learn tools and techniques from energy healing and spiritual healing that we can take into our own lives and practice on a daily basis that really change things for us.
I 100% agree. And I keep using this word with you, and it's that you're very hope giving because it really feels like there's that next step. Every time that you uncover something, every time maybe something isn't working how you were hoping it would work, then there's this next area to investigate, which again should give people hope because you're not broken. Have you ever found somebody that's totally broken and you can't help them?
No, never. Yeah.
Right. And how many people probably walk through your doors and do feel that they are broken and it might work for somebody else, but not for them?
Yes, 100%. In fact, I think that's fair. If you look at just diet culture in general, I mean, how many times did we get duped? This is the thing. This is going to solve it. Went on this diet and they told me it was a lifestyle change, but then they had me eating 800 calories a day and, I couldn't sustain it. And people feel like they've spent money and time and energy on things where they got a false promise, and then they're left disheartened. And it's fair to be skeptical. And so I think that people need to see for themselves and be willing to take a risk on somebody. And especially when it comes to trauma work, it's okay to ask 2 or 3 different people what they do and how they do it before you land on that person that feels like the right fit for you, where you're actually going to open those doors. And it's understandable. I get the skepticism. I mean, I have a lot of skepticism in me from things that I've done. And I ask a lot of questions, and I say, ask questions, because that's how you're going to get to the place where you feel safe and comfortable and willing to take those chances on new things.
Right. And just to reframe that, it's healthy skepticism, right? As well as be your own advocate. Yes. So if anyone is feeling like neither of those are appropriate, healthy, and you're your own advocate, it's great.
Exactly.
Like, do that. What am I not asking you that I should be?
Oh, good question. When it comes to like, what exactly do people learn when they work with me, and what exactly is, this program all about? I'm hearing a lot about emotional and trauma, but when do we get to the food part? When do I learn, how to stop being an emotional eater? Am I going to lose weight? What's going to happen? I think that it's really hard for people when they come in to step back from what they've been taught, which is quick fixes and how do I get to my goal in the fastest way possible with the least amount of pain. What I like to help people understand is that if you are to the point where you're struggling with emotional eating and have been yo-yo dieting for a lot of time, then you have, disordered eating, and you have to relearn how to eat in order to be healthy. And that takes time. It does take energy, but it's not as hard as you think. So when people come into my program, I'm trying to think about them as overstressed, overbusy, overcaring for others. How can we, in short order, put some things in your life that are going to change your relationship with food and your body? So I'm teaching quick, easy tools that any busy person can implement, because that was the only way I was going to get better. And then, once you start using these tools regularly, and you start unwinding some of the things that kind of got you to this position in the first place, you sort of naturally see a progression with food. And as I said in the last time we spoke, learning to trust yourself being that big goal. When you trust yourself, you can be around food in any situation, out to dinner with girlfriends, at a reception, wherever, work function, when you're traveling, all of those things. And suddenly it's not so stressful anymore. And it becomes easier and it becomes lighter. That weight that's holding you back, that's making you feel like you're never going to get better, it becomes lighter. And when that happens, it only expands from there into bigger, better things. So I like to say, really, if you're thinking about doing something, then you're looking for small changes that add up over time that you can keep with you, that you're not going to burn out on, get sick of, be done with, or just be duped again. Look for something that you're going to be able to implement and keep in your life.
Amen, sister. I knew we brought you on for a reason. So good.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes. And if there is something that you're like, if you hear nothing else, if you are wrapping your arms around our listeners, I'm sure it's what you just said, but is there just that one takeaway if they heard nothing else? What do you pray and hope that they heard out of you today?
Oh, I would say, believe me, if I can change, you can change. I mean, I thought I was the most broken. Like, I thought, I'm hopeless. There is no way that I will ever get out of this. I will always see the scale as the determining factor to my success. And I will always feel somehow pulled towards food, towards sugar. I just don't know how I'm ever going to heal these relationships. I thought all of those things. And believe me, if I can heal and get to the place where I am, you can too, and anyone can. You just have to believe in it.
Yeah, thank you for that. And again, I think our listeners are going, this is amazing. We love Margie. We shouted it out in our part 1, but let's say it again. You have an intensive, which is like a retreat coming up. It's an overnight. Talk about that one more time for us.
Yes. So if you want to sort of immerse yourself in the weight within and learn more about, how can I start implementing these tools right away? And how can I get deeper with this so that it's not just a superficial change? Then I would encourage you to look into my retreat intensive. That is the second weekend in November here in Louisville. And all you have to do is hop on weightwithin.com and fill out my general interest form. Let me know you're interested, and I will reach out to you personally and talk to you and make sure it's a good fit for you. It's going to be small, limited number of people so that you really get personal time with me. And so you really connect with the group. And what you'll get out of that is tools, techniques, connections, and you'll be well on your way to changing how you feel about food and your body by the time that space is over.
Yeah, so good. And I will put all of your contact information in the show notes so our listeners can just pop over there and click a link. And just again, thank you. I feel like you have poured so much of your wisdom and time over our community, and so grateful and honored to have you.
I'm honored to be here. Thank you so much for the time. And I love being here. So thank you.
Thank you. This is not the end of our hangout. You will be back, Margie.